I remember our first game in Port Villa, and we would have had 5,000 people, and it was a bit drizzly and rainy, and no one knew really anything about the sport. They came there for the occasion, and it was so awesome.
Today on the podcast, we have Dane Campbell. Dane is the recruitment manager for the North Queensland Cowboys and has also played a pivotal role in the creation of rugby league in Jamaica and Vanuatu. In addition to this, he has more recently played a role in the Pacifique Treize, which is one of the topics that we discussed today. We hope you enjoy.
We thought, well, hang on a minute, we've got a French territory that's sitting 2 hours from Brisbane in New Caledonia. In amongst it are 300,000 people. There is a truckload of big athletic talent. With the rise of Pacifica talent in the NRL, so it was born about, how do we help France? If we had a club team that was based in New Caledonia, inadvertently, we would then have an extra 30 players of French nationality who all of a sudden, if they're good enough, they then play in the NRL. Or if they're not, they're French nationals and they can go play for Catalan or Toulouse or the national team.
Dane Campbell, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much for having me. Wonderful to get on and talk international footy this time of year. Very excited to talk with you both.
Absolutely. We're excited to have you. And as always, I've got Stu in the studio. We should start calling it that. How have you been, Stu? You had a good week?
Yeah, I had a very good week, Keith. And we've got the Pacific Champs coming up shortly. So I'm very excited about that. And I'm also very excited to have someone in Australia to talk about International Rugby League. We've been all over the world, particularly to the UK and Europe. So it's nice to have someone in Australia to talk about International Rugby League. And thanks for having a chat with us on the podcast today. First of all, can you give us a little bit of an insight to your background and how you started playing rugby league?
Yeah, sure. So like many young Queenslanders, I sort of fell into rugby league through my father who played the game and, grandparents, uncles, etc. Always grew up seeing it on TV. All the friends played it at school. So from a young age, I was introduced to the game and was fortunate enough to spend junior time at a junior club in Brisbane called Pine Rivers Bears. Went on over to Redcliffe, and spent probably a good sort of 6 or 7 years coming through the juniors and then into Queensland Cup level football there before finding my way on to, sort of the professional league into initially up into North Queensland and then back down to Newcastle and doubling back to Brisbane to Redcliffe and East Tigers. But I guess my love for rugby league was born about from a young age. And as I said, like many Queensland kids, you had rugby league in the winter and cricket in the summer.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Auto wiki with the garage door as well, I think.
Absolutely.
But could you tell us a bit about how clubs like Pine Rivers, Redcliffe and East Tigers developed you as a player and perhaps a bit sentimentally, but maybe as a person as well?
Yeah, I guess, your community-based clubs are your lifeblood of the game, aren't they, at grassroots level? And I was probably fortunate that the particular club that I was involved in from a very young age, the Pine Rivers Club, it was all your friendship network and, it was a captive market. It wasn't, what we have today where rugby union and AFL and soccer and, it's pretty much rugby league is king. So, everyone that you knew in your local community were all down there at the same time doing the same thing and having a wonderful time. So I think those community clubs certainly play a big factor on anyone, their love for the game and the passion for the game from a young age. But further from there, I guess there's steps and there's different clubs with different ambitions. And I was probably fortunate enough that once you start making a few little representative teams, the next sort of step for myself was over to Redcliffe, which was probably about a 25-minute drive from where I lived to Pine Rivers. And they had a bit more aspiration. They had a Queensland Cup-based club and had a wonderful history in the game. And I guess once you get to that next step, you get to 13, 14, 15 if you're making some representative teams, and rugby league becomes a little bit more than just for the fun of it. You start to see some sparkly lights and think about the what if that could be a career. And again, I was very fortunate and blessed, landed a club like Redcliffe, that had some wonderful people and wonderful history in the game, sort of helped promote that passion that I already had, but then to take it to the next step.
Dane, you're a halfback, and your big NRL break came via the Newcastle Knights, where I believe you played 6 first-grade matches. What was that experience like, and did the immortal Andrew Johns pass on any tips to you?
Yeah, you say it now in hindsight and have a bit of a laugh at it, but as a young aspiring halfback, I don't know if I chose too well to end up at the Knights. I had the one great Andrew Johns above me, and then underneath, only a couple of years younger, I had another young boy, Jared Mullen, coming up, who went on to play, 200 plus NRL games and State of Origin. So, yeah, probably as a young half, in hindsight, I probably maybe chose the wrong direction there, but I think wonderful time of life, and incredibly happy that I got to experience that. It's something, as a young kid, you dream about playing on an NRL field, and you train so hard and you sacrifice so much. That was a wonderful time in my life. And, I probably had some other opportunities to continue on in that NRL space, and, for whatever reason at the time, decided to go a different path. And, I'm certainly happy with that, where that's all landed now in the future.
I think you've given back to the game 10 times over in terms of the development that you played a part in, but we'll get to that a little bit later on. For now, my question is, after a couple of seasons at Newcastle, I believe you had a very brief stint in administration at the Sunshine Coast Falcons as their CEO. How did that come about, and was it a good introduction to future roles?
Absolutely, yeah. It's probably, to be fair, it's probably something that I did at the time that I probably jumped into a little bit before my time, I think, if I look at it back now. And I probably saw it as a longer term. I always had a passion, for developing the game, for, coaching, for administration, and probably saw getting into that reasonably early in my life as maybe being a longevity in the game rather than a player who, at my level, I feel as though I probably, as a player, was going to be one of those bouncers, a guy that, went from club every couple of years and, just made enough to get by, but never sort of really cracked it. And that's probably how I felt at the time. I wish I probably bit down on my mouth guard a bit harder and sort of had a different mindset at the time. But I think, choosing that other path has probably given me some wonderful life experiences. It was fleeting at the Falcons at the time. I realised probably, mere months into the role that, I still had a burning desire to play at a high level of football, and I missed that. And I ended up doubling back and going down to East Tigers, where I spent a couple of really wonderful years there. And, I don't regret that, but I think it opened my eyes to differing avenues within the game. And it's more than just being a player sometimes. There's multiple roles within the game, whether it be coaching, administration, that can play a part, and you can be involved in the game in those areas.
Dane, talking about playing, I believe you suffered a serious injury when captain coach of Noosa, that it put an end to your playing career. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I unfortunately was in a game there one day and against Caloundra, and there was a little scuffle that broke out, and sillily I probably jumped in the middle of it trying to calm it down, and unfortunately got a king hit on the side of the head, which caused bleeding on the brain. And as a result of that, unfortunately, I had some complications, had a craniotomy to relieve the pressure and drain the blood from the brain. And, I see now a guy like Tamari Martin, who suffered a similar type of injury, and to see him get back on the field and the courage that shows is testament to him and his desire to want to play the game at a high level. But, yeah, that was a scary part of my life. And at that point in my life, I'd probably been through the professional phase. That was more to the back end of my 20s, and, I'd gone into that coaching route, and I'd sort of taken a passion towards the coaching side of things, and realised that playing on beyond that, although I got the all clear, fortunately, and didn't suffer any longer term effects from the injury, that was my time to call it. I'd had a young family, my daughter, my eldest daughter now, she was only, 6 to 8 months old. And you realise then that, some things are bigger than, playing the game. And that was my, I guess, last opportunity to play, but, I've certainly remained involved ever since.
Well, that's an incredible story. And I guess hopefully it, sort of made you a stronger man for that. And finally, I can thank my wife for this. I actually know what a craniotomy is, having to sit through 6 seasons of Grey's Anatomy. So I know it's not a mild process. But anyway, next question is, obviously, this is sort of hindsight bias as well. I guess shortly after that happened, you went into coaching. With the dust settling, do you think that was always going to be your destiny?
Yeah, I guess as, player-driven, focus at the start when you first start out, you probably always think that you're going to play Origin or for your country, and that's what you want to do. And I probably had some aspirations about travelling overseas and playing the game in England or France. And that was certainly something that I really would have loved to have done. But, life chose a different path, and that's okay. And I think my inquisitive nature and my genuine want to help other people was always going to lead me to, whether it was coaching or administration. I feel as though game for me, is a catalyst to, help change and develop people. And, this is just a conduit to do it.
Dane, you had the opportunity to work with the Melbourne Storm in recruitment. How did that come about, and what insights can you provide on why the Storm have been such a successful club over a long period?
Yeah, I was incredibly fortunate, sort of right spot, right time. And this is the other part of rugby league. It sort of builds connections. We all have a mutual respect for one another, I think, within the game. And I was fortunate enough to be right spot, right time. I was doing some coaching at the Sunshine Coast Falcons, and the Melbourne Storm had decided at the end of the national youth competition that they were going to move their under-20s team to the Sunshine Coast. And as a result of that, I knew through my sort of junior days, I was fortunate enough to have a scholarship with the Brisbane Broncos, and a gentleman by the name of Paul Bunn was involved both at Redcliffe and then at the Broncos. And when he moved to the Sunshine Coast, he was looking for someone to sort of come into that junior recruitment space and pathways space. And again, probably fortunate that I was there at the right spot, right time, and had that connection with Paul. And he was good enough to give me an opportunity as a young man coming into it, and just very happy that he did, because the 5 years I spent with the Storm were incredibly successful years, and I got to see, how an organisation of that magnitude, how they operate, how they do things on a consistent basis, and the high standards they drive that I think have set me up pretty well in the last few years.
It's probably the most successful or most professionally run sporting administration in Australasia, in my mind. And it had to be, as a team in the heart of AFL, put there in 1998, winning a first premiership in 1999. The only criticism I have of the Melbourne Storm, and this is not levelled at you, is I would have loved to have seen more Victorians come through by now.
Yeah.
Do you know if they're doing anything? I mean, you're sort of long gone from Melbourne, but are they making more efforts to actually blood some more Melburnians?
Yeah, absolutely. And if I could, I'll just double back on Stu's last question just quickly as to what I believe potentially makes them so successful, or has done for a very long period of time. And that starts at the top, from Matt Tripp, their owner, to Frank Benisi, the football manager, to Craig, obviously, in his role as head coach, and to Paul in his role in recruitment. It's everyone buying into the same direction and the same message. And I think the values that the club instill, and certainly what Craig instills around consistency and hard work, and they're two things that not only do they preach, but they live by and they promote and reward. And I think that's a really big thing over their time, is that they've been built on hard work, trust, and consistency. And you've seen the results. And I think when you have the mix of those things with, your talent, that's when you see Cameron Smiths and Cooper Cronks or Billy Slaters. Like, if they're one in isolation, they come and go. But when they join and marry up, that's when you have greatness. And they've been fortunate enough to do that. To the secondary question, the Victorian question, absolutely. I know that they're doing some wonderful things down there with the government around training facilities and sort of trying to make their pathways a lot more robust and trying to give more opportunity to young Victorian players. I can only speak of my time there, but I'm really fortunate to see young guys like Dean Iramia, Kelma Tuolangi, Suafar Longo, even Sione Finau, who's over at the Dragons. These guys all came through the pathway and have gone on to play NRL. And Fanua Pole over at West Tigers, Trent Talau, who's now at the Panthers. These guys are all in the last 5, 6, 7 years come through the Victorian pathway. So I think year on year, you're going to see drip feed of that. You're going to see 1 to 2 to 3 of those guys come through at the NRL level each year.
I absolutely love that. That's a fantastic answer as well. Let's move to your latest role, or your current role, I should say. You moved to the Cowboys as a recruitment manager. What are the contrasts between the two clubs, that being Melbourne and North Queensland, and what are the synergies as an opposite?
Yeah, I guess the first thing was when the opportunity I rose out of the blue a little bit. I was very happy and content with my time in Melbourne. We'd gone to a couple of grand finals, and I thought that was sort of where I was destined to be for a duration of time. But the opportunity, as I said, came out of the blue a little bit. But I was very happy as a young Queensland kid to try and grab that and run with it. And I'd spent a year up here in Townsville as a player in the young gun system as a young 20-year-old, and had always had a fondness for it. And my wife, she's from Mackay, North Queensland originally, so there was some opportunity to come back to Queensland, up here in North Queensland in particular, and I guess have a challenge. The challenge at the time, that I came in just on the back of COVID, and the Cowboys have obviously had the Jono years, and the Matty Scotts and those sort of guys, and that sort of moved on by the time I arrived. And I guess it was an interesting space whereby they'd gone from having success in 2015 and 17 into the grand final. Michael Morgan was sort of having some injury concerns. And that had a couple of lean years, like 18, 19, not so much where they wanted to be, 2020 as well. And I guess when I started, it was the same time as what, Todd Payton had come in as coach, Michael Luck had come in as GM of footy, and we're all similar age, similar backgrounds, and we all had a real desire to make some change, and, through differing experiences and differing clubs. And that was exciting. The challenge to get our club that had had sustained success from probably 2005 through to sort of 2017, they were always in the finals, they were a perennial club, to then sort of fallen away a little bit, to then think that we could get that back up to where we all know we should be at the Cowboys, in that we've got a wonderful facility, we've got a tremendous, tremendous following for support network. And where we differ, if you're looking at comparisons between a team like the Storm or the Cowboys, is the Melbourne Storm, we spoke about it briefly around the young Victorian players, is they don't necessarily or didn't have like a large catchment area that everyone was coming to take. For us, we were scouting in Queensland, New South Wales, New Zealand, Fiji. I even went to South Africa at one stage, to go scout talent. So we were looking everywhere for rugby league talent. We even went to England a few times. And whereas up here in Townsville, we've got a rugby league mad playing population, and we've got a huge geographic area that we need to service and cover and promote. And to do that, it's a completely different challenge. And, we do have the border protection model that, everyone hears of the stories. If you lose a player, if you lose a young guy like Kalen, or, of recent times, Hamaso, it hurts, and Xavier Savage and these guys. So our challenge is to, one, provide as much opportunity and feedback for these young North Queensland, Central Queensland talent to try and play for their home team or home region club. And we've seen some success in the last 3-4 years in that. Tom Dearden, Helam Lukey, Jeremiah Nanai of recent times, this year Jackson Purdue, Jamal Shivasaki. So, it's constantly getting the mix right between giving the younger players in your catchment region as much opportunity to become first graders, with obviously trying to be successful for the now as well. And that sometimes means you've got to go outside your own backyard to find that, complementary talent. And I think a guy like Sam McIntyre, who played against the PNG team on the weekend's a good example of that he sort of just didn't find his groove at another club, but I think he's found his spot up here. And we dive deep into the type of person we want to have here. And it's not for everyone. It's hot. It's uncomfortable sometimes, but, and we're isolated. We live an outdoors lifestyle, but, we're not a metropolitan city. So you've got to have a certain attribute set and personality to handle the challenges that we face up here. But equally so, it's so cool to live here. And I think we're getting the balance right. Are we there yet? No, but I think we're on the up.
Definitely.
That's a really interesting answer, Dane. Interesting to look at the contrast between the two clubs.
Apologies for the break in the interview, guys. We recently received an email from a listener who wants to bring awareness to the dire plight of the London Broncos. Most listeners of our show are avid rugby league expansionists, as we are, and we're appealing to you to do whatever small part that you can to help out. The following message came from a listener named Ian White. It reads, "As you may be aware, the London Broncos are on something of a difficult journey currently. We are facing likely demotion from the Super League under the new IMG grading model, having spent the season battling bravely against the odds. The club's future has been put into doubt by the current chairman deciding to step away after nearly 3 decades at the helm. The club faces an uncertain future, and there's lots of work going on to try and raise awareness of the situation across the rugby league community and help preserve the Broncos moving forward. One of the current initiatives is a crowdfunding page that's been set up for those wanting to help out, the link of which can be found in the show notes to this episode. Any donation will help, no matter how small. Preserving the Broncos is really important, not just for us fans of the club, but for rugby league in London and the Northern Hemisphere more broadly. There is a small but really dedicated and passionate rugby league community here in London with a strong Southern Hemisphere expat presence, which offers a lot to the sport more broadly. Once again, guys, a link to the crowdfunding page will be put in the show notes to this episode. This is essentially an appeal to all rugby league fans who believe that the sport needs a presence in London, which I'm sure is most of our listeners.
Obviously, this varies depending what part of the season you're at, but I think people would be very interested in this. Talk us through what your day looks like as an NRL recruitment manager.
Yeah, so I guess I'll start, with the start of the season. We've got probably upwards of around 72 to 74 games of elite level rugby league. And I've got to clarify, so my role is in the male space, so I don't oversee the female space at the present moment. But, in the male space alone, we have upwards of 72 games of elite level rugby league from under 17s upwards per week. Now, trying to think that you could watch 72 games of rugby league during the course of a weekend is impossible. And obviously we have some software that assists in that process, but, it's trawling through stats. It's, talking to agents. It's dealing with the salary cap and all that implies, and trying to make decisions based on best practice. So oftentimes, you're anywhere from sort of February through to, I'd say end of May, start of June. It's 7 days a week, and it's often 10 to 12-hour days. You're taking phone calls from agents at night at 9 o'clock, or 7 o'clock in the morning. You're on all the time, and then you add in some carnivals, along the way, as in schoolboy carnivals, whether it be, we have ones here in Queensland, we have them in New South Wales. You got the national championships, and I guess for myself, with a passion for international footy, then you're sort of up watching a bit of Super League. You're keeping an eye on New Zealand Rugby League and Union. So very quickly your week goes, that's for sure.
I'm going to put you on the spot here, Dane. Do you think that player managers have too much power? Do you think they cop a raw end of stick in terms of their reputation, or is it justified?
How many have you got listening to the podcast?
Depends on the day. Hopefully at least
I think there's obviously a place, for agents, and some have more players than others. So by default of that, they'll have more influence, and that's due to their hard work as well. Like they've earned the right to secure the players in the player market, and by default of that, I guess that buys a little bit of equity in the game, and they've got a part to play, as the Players Association do, and that's a diplomatic answer, I know, but I deal with them on a daily basis, and I think that's the cohabitation, isn't it, of rugby league, is we all want and desire a certain outcome, and then sometimes your opinion differs depending on what side of the fence you lead. And if I could have it all my own way, that'd be great, but sometimes you've got to compromise, and that's part of the game.
Yeah, well said, and a very acceptable answer as well. Now we'll move on to a topic that I think all three of us are genuinely passionate about, which is international rugby league. And not to make you blush here, but you are definitely one of the unsung heroes with your background in international rugby league. You founded the West Indies Rugby League, which morphed into Jamaica Rugby League. What inspired you to do that, and how did all that play out?
Yeah, well, Stu, can I start with, I understand that you've had some involvement with the Greek Rugby League, is that correct?
Yes, I have, yes.
Yeah, so I guess I'll start off with the inspiration for it. My initial foray into international rugby league was probably born about, I went on holidays randomly in sort of, 16, 17 years of age with my family and got to Fiji. And I remember at the time, I was sort of coming through the Broncos junior system. I'd seen Lottie Takiri around, or I'd seen Petro Sivanasiv around. I was like, they're big athletic dudes. And then you get to Fiji and you walk around the streets and you see hundreds of Lotties or hundreds of Petros. And I just remember coming back from that trip going, wow, like how come we don't see more Lotties in the NRL? And you think back, to 2000, there wasn't what we have now. There wasn't, three Fijians at every club. Like there was two in the league type thing. And you think that probably spurred me on to want to know a bit more about the international game. I mean, to understand why we in Australia and obviously England and France had such a significant part to play, but why these other nations with athletic talent, why weren't they playing? What was the hindrance? What was the setback? And I guess fast forwarding to, where that got to a few years later was I went to Henson Park and it was Greece playing Italy. And randomly I was sitting in the stands and met up with a few friends, and it was it was predominantly heritage players, right? Greeks and Italians of heritage in Sydney, and they played a game. And I remember I must have somehow randomly, a mate of mine, Grant Ravelli, he might have played for Italy that day. And
Warriors, great.
Yes, yeah, I just remember sitting there and thought to myself, well, if this can happen in Australia, and I'd sort of taken a bit of an interest in the English rugby league, and I thought to myself as I was sitting in the stand that day, I was thinking, well, if this can happen in Sydney to diaspora people or people of heritage, then why couldn't it happen for the Afro-Caribbean people in England? And that's literally the seed that sort of it came about from. And then when I sort of dug a bit deeper, and this is going to sound random, right, is you start looking at, who were the people of colour, obviously, that were playing in England at the time, and they were predominantly, whether they were Nigerian or Jamaican or Trinidadian or, from Barbados even. Like, we started to collate some info as to backgrounds of where some of these people were from. And literally, I thought to myself, where is the coolest place that I would love to go? And, I thought the West Indies would be a really cool spot to understand. And growing up in Australia, where cricket, at the time was, and still is probably one of our national treasures, well, West Indies was synonymous. And we knew that through the identification of where some players' backgrounds were from, that we were never going to have a Jamaican team straight away. We were going to have to use the West Indies concept, where it was a broader concept and bring in people from all over the Caribbean to give them an opportunity to play under the one umbrella. But it was always done with the notion that we wanted to start something to eventually see enough Jamaicans take the game to Jamaica or enough Trinidadians take the game to Trinidad. And so we were fortunate enough in that early stage that the majority of, I guess, the difference makers were either Jamaican and or from Trinidad and Tobago. And I remember getting an email. So once a bit of traction came about and there's a bit of news and media attention behind it in the UK, we got a random email from a guy named Paul Morris, who was based in Jamaica. And he was heavily involved in the rugby union setup with William Masterton. And they were a bit disgruntled at the time. The rugby union was sort of floundering a bit, and they'd sort of seen what we were trying to do in the UK. And Paul was originally from Wales, so he understood the game and knew a bit about the game. And he got in touch with me and he just sort of said, would you come to Jamaica? Would you tell us more about the game? Could you introduce the game? And I'd already booked a flight to go to England and we were going to play a game. And West Indies were due to play South Africa. Fortunately enough, I sort of was able to change my flight schedule and end up going the other way from us here in Down Under. Now, for all our international viewers, is instead of going left, I went right and ended up going to Jamaica on my way to London. And we stopped in and I got to meet Paul and William, and that was my first intro to Romeo and Roy. So shout out to Romeo Monteith and Roy Calvert, who, from that initial 2004 visit, still ploughing away and doing wonderful things for the game there in Jamaica. So that was a really cool time in my life. Yeah, got to experience it and see it on the ground for what it was at the time. And, Paul and his wife, Sue Morris, just took it and ran with it. They just went full tilt. They got out of the rugby union space and into the rugby league space. And here we are, 20 years later down the track, and, they've got 1,000 registered players, high school, tertiary, senior club competitions. They play internationals on a yearly basis, and they're still the same guys that are running it and giving their heart and soul to the game, which is so cool.
Yeah, absolutely. And Dane, I know what it felt like for me being involved with Greece and seeing him in the last World Cup. What did it mean for you to see Jamaica play in the World Cup?
Yeah, I was fortunate enough to go over there. I got to spend some time with the team, and it was in a non-official capacity. I was sort of over there doing some scouting, and fortunate enough to tie that in with a bit of opportunity to catch up with the boys and Jamaican team and spend some time with them. And got to 2 games. I got to see them that first game against Ireland in Leeds, and that was a special moment, to sit in the crowd and hear the anthem played, and look and probably in that moment reflect and remember. Unfortunately, we lost Paul Morris, many years ago. He passed away, and he left a tremendous legacy, but he was someone that I thought of at the time, a real patriot and a real pioneer of the game that wasn't there to sort of witness what we were seeing. But that was cool to see, the Jamaican colours flying high. And probably I remember in that instance, I looked out, and it was really cool to see a couple of the local base players playing. Like that was for me, really fundamental to what we and why we did what we did initially, is to try and give people from the island that opportunity to play on the bigger stage, and they got that opportunity. So that was really pleasing to see. And then the second game against New Zealand, that was just so cool to, see a big nation like New Zealand. And, I'd spent some time obviously at the Storm, and we had Big Nelson and, Brandon Smith and these types of guys, and seeing them play against the Jamaican boys, and then to score the first try of Jamaica's World Cup history. I remember we were getting beaten, let's say we're getting beaten by 40 points at that stage, but I was sitting next to Roy, who was coaching the team at the time, along with Jermaine Coleman, and we just erupted and hugging each other. And you think, here we are getting beaten by 40 or 50 points, but to score that try and create history, that'll live with us forever. So that was just such a wonderful moment, and something we can all reflect on, hopefully in another 20 years' time, as being the first of many, hopefully.
Oh, spine tingling. Oh, that was the best answer yet, I can tell you. Oh, makes me want to go there, go back in time and just be there for that. But as much as I'd love to savor that moment for longer, we'll move on a little bit. Post West Indies Rugby League, you went to Vanuatu to help set up rugby league there. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, again, probably driven around the Jamaican stuff. Just took off. Like, we just had some tremendous people that were invested into the game and became passionate about the game. And I heard your podcast with Danny there the other day, and that sort of, again, brings home the passion. You got to have people on the ground that are passionate, become rugby league people. And, in Jamaica, that's what happened. It was just, whether it's luck or, just stumbling across the right people at the right time. But those guys, I can tell you, Roy knows I'll say Nelly, as much about the game as what I do. And, I've been playing the game since I was 6-year-old, but he's fully invested. He'll often ring me and tell me what's going wrong with the Cowboys or what we're doing right, depending on the weekend. But I thought to myself at the time, like, I've obviously gone into a different space in my life too. I'd sort of started to have kids. I'd had my brain injury. I was getting into coaching. You go on into the workforce. So I probably didn't have as much opportunity to jump on a plane as I did as a younger person. I'd gone over to Jamaica 3 or 4 times and spent some time on the ground there trying to help, flourish things, but felt as though they were at a stage where they could be autonomous, they could help themselves, and the people that were driving it were certainly capable of doing so. So ended up, not phasing out completely, but just sitting on the sidelines, always being a conduit if ever needed an opinion. But I guess that itch needed to be scratched. And for me, it was then, I've travelled to Fiji many a time, but then started to realise, hang on, we got Papua New Guinea that is rugby league mad. We got Fiji that is an emerging nation. This is mid to or early, 2009, 10, 11 sort of period. But then you look at one of our closest neighbours in Vanuatu, and it's only 2.5 hours from Brisbane. It's a stone's throw, but yet they had no rugby league activity, none, zero. So I was like, the question, the intrigue for myself was like, why? Like, why is this a Melanesian state that, is surrounded by all this rugby league, but not having experience for himself? And then you dive into it and you find out through history, and I won't dive deep on this because it will take up a whole nother episode, but the history here in Queensland where I live and the South Sea Island migration, or the blackbirding period of our history is, incredible is not the right word because I don't want to do an injustice to the South Sea Island people for what they went through at the time. But, it's a part of our history in Queensland that we don't really understand or get told too much about. But when you delve into it, we've had the likes of Mal Meninga, Gordon Tallis, Sam Bacco. There's some really prominent rugby league names that, their family and lineage had come from the Vanuatu or Solomon Islands. So delving into that, it became not only an interesting project, but it became a real historical eye opener for myself. And the deeper I went, the more intrigued I became. And I guess I just got off my own bat and found a few people of similar interest, went on over and put a call out to any interested parties that wanted to play. And fortunately enough, there were enough to form a team, and we started from there.
How's it going in Vanuatu now, Dane? And what impact has the Australian government Pacific strategy and funding had on the nation and rugby league?
Yeah, I think I can comment from my time involved. So, that sort of 2010 through to sort of 2014, 15 on the high side. I felt as though we were doing the most we could with limited resources. We never once asked for a handout. Everything we did at the very start was, we understood that it had to be us. So any generation of income was done through sponsorship. It wasn't asking for handouts. It was, we understand this is where we're at. And fortunately, we had our very first international on home soil was against Greece. And
Yes.
I remember speaking to, Steve Georgalis and Terry Liberopoulos at the time, and they were pioneers. The Greeks, they'd been to New Caledonia. They'd been to far-flung places. They were pioneers themselves. And when we put out the call, Terry and Steve jumped on it straight away, which was cool. And I remember our first game in Port Villa, and we would have had 5,000 people, and it was a bit drizzly and rainy, and no one knew really anything about the sport, but they came there for the occasion, and it was so awesome. And since then, they've obviously had some harder times during the COVID pandemic. It's a continual battle because field space is limited. You've only got X amount of fields in Port Villa in particular that have access to rugby league sized pitches, and oftentimes they're inundated with soccer, which is king. So it's a hard place for them to be. And with the Pacific or Oz Pacific funding and the government's recognition, obviously at the moment, the majority of that funding is going towards the bigger Pacific nations in Fiji, Papua New Guinea, Tonga, Samoa. But you would like to think that in time there might be some opportunity for development or some opportunity for some funding back into both Vanuatu and even the Solomon Islands.
I think for this next question, our good friend from Catalan Media, Steve Brady, will be very happy that we asked this. But can you tell us a bit about Pacifique Treize and what the goals are and what your involvement has been with them?
Yeah, again, sort of you go through different phases, and I probably, with the Vanuatu stuff, highly capable individuals that sort of took the run with it and, doing a great job there, trying to keep the flame flickering. So, the next journey for me, I had sort of gone on to the Cowboys stuff. And again, that itch to be scratched was again looking at how I could play a potential involvement with, the creation or development of the game. And to be fair, the Pacifique Treize stuff came about of a different model. It's sort of seen how a nation could be impacted, like a Jamaica or a Vanuatu. But the Pacifique Treize stuff was actually done on the notion of watching the most recent World Cup and thinking to ourselves, France had gone into, and I'm going to say this openly and honestly, and it's what I feel as though they've gone into decline from an international space for a long time. I think they should be a top 4 to 6 nation in the world, but I don't feel as though they are. And, I think there's many a part to play, and this might earn the wrath of some people, but that's okay. The Catalan Dragons' success about playing in Challenge Cup finals and, finals at Old Trafford last year, at the detriment of their own development of young French players, has the French national team. And, we're now, because, it's continually looking to win competitions, and you're getting English players, you're getting Kiwis, you're getting Aussies go over, and you're taking the spots of young, presumed talented young French people. So we thought differently. We thought, through a good friend of mine, Laurent Garnier, who spent a lot of time in France, obviously, French national, we thought, well, hang on a minute, we got a French territory that's sitting 2 hours from Brisbane in New Caledonia. And in amongst it are 300,000 people. There is a truckload of big athletic talent. So with the rise of Pacifica talent in the NRL, how could we actually help France? So it was born about, how do we help France? And by doing so, we thought, if we had a club team that was based in New Caledonia, a la the PNG Hunters are, or the Kaiviti Silktails are, in the New South Wales comp, if we could have Pacifique Treize, which is an entity that is a French-speaking or French majority team based in New Caledonia, it's only 2-hour flight to Brisbane. Economically, it's stable. Infrastructure is great. And we thought if we could get a team based out of there to participate in the Queensland competition, inadvertently, we would then have an extra 30 players of French nationality and I'll lead on to this in a second, who all of a sudden, if they're good enough, they then play in the NRL. Or if they're not, they're French nationals and they can go play for Catalan or Toulouse or the national team. And you do a quick research on, per population, Wallis Fortuna, which is a different French territory within the Pacific, per capita has the most professional rugby players in the world, per capita. Professional rugby players. So in the French elite, what do they call it? Pro 14 rugby union and the rugby union competitions. The amount of dysphoria of people that are from Wallis and Fortunan background, and in a population of 11,000 people in the atolls of Wallis Fortuna, it's incredible how many professional players there are. And they're big and they're powerful. And that's something the French national team lacks. They lack big players. They lack athletic talent. So we were outwardly thinking, how do we help the French? But inadvertently, how do we do it closer to Australia? Because by playing in the Australian competition, as we've seen with the PNG Hunters, has expanded the PNG's Kummel's footprint or potential player pool.
So where is it at right now? I mean, when obviously COVID really hurt it, I can imagine. But is it any closer to addition into the Queensland Cup, or where's the bid?
Sorry. So I went off on a bit of a rant there, sorry. But to bring that back into where it is. So 2020 we launched, believe it or not, we launched the concept on the back of meetings that we'd held with the QRL, talking to them about where their next potential expansion may happen. And we had really good traction. We had great dialogue with the QRL, and they'd sort of given their blessing to explore the opportunity. And then COVID hit. So we launched February and COVID hit March. And so it was just rotten timing. And then we obviously packed up, and then the borders shut and we couldn't get over to do development work, et cetera, et cetera. But where we're at now is, here we are 4 years down the track, and we probably reset our lens a little bit, is that to run a Queensland Cup club, you probably need $1 million Australian to make that feasible. Do we have $1 million? No, we don't. It takes a big benefactor, and that's not there at the moment. The economy's still regenerating itself. So we need to have a realistic lens of that. And so what we've approached the Queensland Rugby League about is, instead of setting our sights on, the top and working our way back down, is we're actually looking at the other way around. And can we enter an under-17 team in what's called the Cyril Connell Cup? And then we grow over a 4 or 5 year period to eventually, hopefully one day, have a Queensland Cup team. But the reality is, even if we get to having a team at under-17s and under-19s level, that is going to be success, because we're going to put French national players in the eyesight of NRL scouts. because they're playing in the competition that's playing with elite level talent here in Australia. So you're marking apples for apples then. And you know what? If one of those kids doesn't get picked up by an NRL club, but he gets picked up by Toulouse to go play in the championship, awesome. Great result. So to finish that, is we had a tour. So we went with a pilot program this year. We ran 3 games in Queensland and we were very competitive in 2 and we sort of got blown out in 1. But these kids have played all but 2 or 3 games of rugby league in their life. So to think that we were competitive against teams that have trained for 6-7 months, that gives us hope and optimism that if we do this right, we could actually build something. And sorry, I'll just culminate that is one thing that people don't probably understand, and it's not until you dive a bit deeper, but New Caledonia is the base because it's the closest, right? And it's got population and whatever. But there's about 1 million French-speaking nationals in the Pacific. So when you factor in French Polynesia, to say Tahiti, which is another 300,000 people, or the fact that in Vanuatu they're bilingual because of history through the French and English occupation, plus Wallace Fortuna, you're getting close on 1 million French-speaking population within the Pacific. So here's an audience that, as yet, I would even argue that the NRL hasn't captured because I don't know if this is the right word and I don't want to offend people, but we're in Australia, we're ignorant. We're not thinking outwardly. If we promoted the game, even if in the NRL space or the QRL space, we had a highlights package in French of the QRL competition or the NRL, you've got 1 million different people within the Pacific that take an interest because they know Matamaya Tonga, they know Toa Samoa, they've seen what they do, and they want to be like that. But when you can't speak the language or the language isn't common, it's a hindrance. So to break down that or to promote our game within the French-speaking Pacific, there's an opportunity to be had, not only for new eyeballs on the game, but new companies to be invested in the game.
Definitely, I agree.
The next question, Dane, I think you've pretty much answered this, but with PNG likely to be included in the NRL in the next few years, should there be more of a strategy for players from countries, and we talked about New Caledonia and French-speaking countries, but across the Pacific, I suppose, to play in Australia and France or even in New Zealand to get that sort of background experience development from playing in a different country?
So, I guess offering the opportunity to a young Papua New Guinean to experience playing in Australia.
Yes.
I think, and this is me talking with a Pacifique Treize sort of mind, but, I would argue that a Pacifique Treize entity would capture New Caledonia and Vanuatu in its first instance and eventually Tahiti. Silktails are involved in the New South Wales comp. It'd be wonderful to see the PNG Hunters included in the junior space in Queensland as well, competing in what they call the Northern Pool with your Northern Pride, Mackay Cutters, Townsville Blackhawks, just to put them on an even footing because we see on the weekend, where the junior Kummels push the Australian schoolboys all the way. But
absolutely,
you would imagine that if given the opportunity to train regularly and to then compete regularly, even if it's only for a 10-week duration, that's going to be valuable. And any of those playing or training opportunities for those young men are going to be valuable for sure.
Once again, I find myself agreeing with you. We're almost out of questions here. My last one for Stu's last one, I think, is that we all talk about what a great product our sport is, but it just doesn't seem to get the cut through across the globe. Any idea why that would be and what we can do to change that? Because we all believe that rugby league is the best game of the world, but more need to see it. Have you got any ideas how we can do that?
That's a great question. Probably one that I'd have to think a fair bit more about, to be honest. My gut feeling, my very first thing that comes to mind is, it's giving a sample, isn't it? It's like anything in life. You give a sample of something before you dive deep into it. And maybe, just maybe, things like the nines, like a nines World Series where you're taking it to different markets, but you can see it done quickly. Like I sometimes think where we could look to other sports and think it doesn't always have to be that we play for 9 months. Like you can still have a good product and a good entertainment value that can be done in a shorter duration of time. As in, the Big Bash cricket or IPL in the cricket space, they've shown that you can do short duration competitions to sample the product to then draw more corporates, more fans, more engagement. So I guess if my gut feel straight away would be if we had the ability to take nearly like a road show of teams of decent repute to make it entertaining, but you could do it in a small setting and make it the entertainment value. I reckon that captures people because oftentimes when people watch rugby league, they tend to like it. So it's how do you get in front of them more often? And for me, expanding upon that would be taking it to markets that you want to eventually be big in, like in whether that's the big countries, your USAs, your India, your China, whatever, or whether you delve deep into mid-range nations, South Africa, Germany, Argentina, like ones with a bit of rugby union background that probably understand the game, but you pick out some regional hubs and just go for it.
For a guy who didn't initially know how to answer that question, that was a phenomenal answer. I fully agree with that. But Stu, you've got your fan favorite question coming up.
Yeah, so I always finish with a food question, Dane, because
I have been listening to this. I put a bit of thought into this, right?
Yeah. So it's multiple choice. I'll give you 4 choices.
Okay.
Brisbane, Townsville, West Indies, Vanuatu. Where's your favourite food?
Can I add in New Caledonia?
Yes, you can.
All right. So, and how many do I get to pick?
Just one.
Just one. Oh. Okay.
And bonus points if you've got a particular dish.
Well, I was going to go jerk chicken in Jamaica. Like that's got to be right up there. But only because I've been there recently, I probably have to go New Caledonia for the French cuisine. I never knew what foie gras was or escargot, but I've got to say I had a crack and I liked it. So I'm going to go with New Caledonia for now.
Lovely. Great way to finish.
Mind you, I do enjoy the red wine with it too. So
yeah, well, yes, yeah.
Absolutely. As I said, we are out of questions. But is there anything else that you want to add before we wrap up?
I guess thank you for your time. I certainly appreciate talking rugby league and talking in particular international rugby league. And I probably just one final thing. I don't know if this is an opinion or a piece or a soapbox, but I really hope that our game, in particular here in Australia, through what the NRL are doing, the ARLC, continue to invest time into projects like they are in Las Vegas. I think that's a great outcome. I hope there's a whole heap of goodness that comes around the USA and what that could be. And because inadvertently, what that will help is if the game is grown in America, that'll help Canada. It'll help Jamaica. It'll help, the South American countries. And not giving away too many secrets, but I personally think that we're missing a massive, massive audience in Asia. I just think that we have not even explored it in any length or breadth. And at some point, we're a very multicultural society here in Australia with a lot of Asian presence. And I think when we dive deep into that space, we'll see some astronomical growth in the game due to population, but also economy. Eyes watching the game. It doesn't always have to be, this probably goes back to the start of our convo. Not everyone has to be a player. It can be a genuine fan, someone who turns in every week and watches the game, bets on the game. I don't know if that's a thing I should be saying or not, but, invests into the game, sees their product involved in the game. I think sometimes we always get wrapped up in just being a player or a coach, but there's so many mediums to different levels of engagement in the game. And I genuinely think we're missing an opportunity in Asia, and I think that's the next holy grail.
Yeah, very, very well said. Stu, you got any last words?
No, I'm just loving listening to your passion and commitment, Dane. It's fantastic. It's it's just great to hear the stories that we hear of people that go out and do this stuff, because I know myself, having been at the coalface, it's not easy. So,
Yeah, I know we've all spent many of our own dollar doing what we do, and the reasons we do is because we love the game and we want to see it grow. And I think for all of us involved now, and hopefully 15, 20 years time, we're talking about Greece and Jamaica being back in World Cups and the rise of new superpowers too. So onwards and upwards for International Rugby League.
Absolutely, and a perfect place to leave it. Dane Campbell, what a pleasure and an honour.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to Everything Rugby League. If you like this episode, give the show a follow and leave a review. For more news and insights, follow us on Facebook or head to everythingrugbyleague.com.